Welcome to today's IIUSA Virtual EB5 Industry Forum. You're logging into the Investor Market Trends and Understanding the EB5 Process panel. Special welcome to all of our international participants. We're pleased to have over 40 countries represented at this year's event and glad for everyone who's able to join us here live today. Before we get started, a quick disclaimer. This webinar is intended for educational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. You should always consult your own legal counsel with questions or concerns on this topic. However, all information is deemed to be accurate and up to date as of the recording of this discussion. A couple housekeeping notes. On the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A function. Today's panel will be an hour and a half long. They will periodically stop to answer questions if they're relevant to the discussion, but also reserve time at the end of the panel for Q&A. Please use only the Q&A function for today's discussion. Before I turn it over to our panelists here and our moderator, Nikolai, I did want to quickly note that this panel, as the title would suggest, is specifically focused on investor market trends and understanding the EB5 process. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding EB5 legislation and the reauthorization efforts. We have a panel on that today at noon, so please be sure you log in for that and direct your relevant reauthorization questions to those panelists. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nikolai. Nikolai is our managing partner of the Asia region for Miller Mayer and today's moderator for the discussion. Nikolai, over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world today. I'm delighted to be moderating this panel entitled Investor Market Trends and Understanding the EB5 Process. Our panel today is going to be divided into three sections. First, we're going to look at market trends in Africa, the Middle East, India, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. Then we will discuss the EB5 investment process from the perspective of the new investor. So kind of a EB5 101 perspective, looking first at the pre-investment and then the investment steps in the process, followed by the immigration law aspects of EB5 investment. And then finally, we hope to leave about 30 minutes or so for questions and answers from the panel. But before diving in, I'd like to give my distinguished panelists a chance to introduce themselves. And to that end, please, why don't we start with Priya Malik.
You're muted, Priya.
Sorry, thank you, Nikolai. I'm Priya Malik, and I'm the Managing Director of STEP Global Group. We are headquartered in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and we've been helping investors from throughout the MENA region, including the Middle East, India, and Africa, with the EB5 process for the past 8 years.
Thank you. Andrew Wall.
Thanks, Nikolai. So I'm Andrew Wall. I'm founder and managing partner of Dynex Capital. I personally am a registered agent with Dalmore broker-dealer. I'm located in South Florida. I've been in the industry since about 2012, so it's been a while. And a lot of these names you'll kind of get to know as a group later on.
Right. And Roy Carrasquillo. I hope I got that last name right, Roy.
You got that right. That's fine. So my name is Roy Carrasquillo. I'm the managing shareholder of Carrasquillo Law Group. We are a boutique corporate securities immigration law firm based in New York. We have offices in Miami, DC, San Francisco, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. And we work with investors, developers, and regional centers with the EB5 and other financing matters with an emphasis in the Latin American region. Thank you, Nikolai.
Excellent. Thank you. Janak Mehta.
Thanks, Nikolai, and thank you, IIUSA, for giving us the opportunity to be on this panel. Hello, everyone. My name is Janak Mehta. I'm the Managing Director of FRR Shares and FRR Immigration. We are a financial services company based in Mumbai, in India, with presence in 12 cities in India. We got into immigration 6 years ago and we are helping investors based here in India for the EB5 process. Nikolai.
Excellent. Ishan Khanna.
Thanks, Nikolai. Hey, everyone. My name is Ishan. I'm first and foremost an EB5 investor. I did EB5 in 2016 and got my green card through the
Ishan,
investment.
I think you're on.
Hey, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay. Hey, everyone. My name is Ishan. I am an EB5 investor. I did EB5 in 2016 and got my green card last year. Permanent green card last year. I also work for EB5 United, an investment issuer that does regional center as well as direct EB5 projects. I recently started a nonprofit organization called the American Immigrant Investor Alliance, who's advocating for EB5 investors for the world over, and we're currently dealing with the reauthorization situation. Thanks.
Thank you. And Daniel Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Ryan here, Managing Director for Atlantic American Partners, Regional Center based in Tampa, Florida. We've been involved in EB5 for over 11 years now. We've done 35 projects successfully and helped about 700 families in their immigration needs.
Thanks. And my name is Nikolai Hinrichsen. I've been practicing EB5 law since about 2007 with Miller Mayer. Before turning to immigration, I was a corporate and securities attorney for a large law firm in San Francisco. And prior to that, I was in-house counsel for a Fortune 500 company in Paris, France. I lead Miller Mayer's EB5 practice out of our Ithaca, New York office. Having recently moved back after 6 years in Asia, first 4 years in Shanghai, where I opened our China office, and then 2 years in Ho Chi Minh City in Saigon. I specialize in both individual investor and regional center representation, as well as complex requests for evidence and NOIDs, and litigation strategy for regional centers and direct investment petitions. So with those introductions in place, let's dive right into the topic of our panel and the first section, which is focused on country-specific considerations. We're going to start off with Africa. And Daniel, can you tell us a little bit about what are the markets in Africa? What are the countries from which we have historically seen EB5 investors sourced?
You know, this is a very enjoyable topic to discuss. I personally lived in Africa for 12 years, and so I'm very familiar with the continent. I lived in Malawi. Long story short, for EB5, prior to COVID, and I know, unfortunately, that is the big elephant in the room for a lot of this discussion, but we found a lot of interest of people in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia. And we're still continuing to receive interest from those folks in those particular countries. And it's starting to expand to other countries as the markets develop and as the economies mature. The issue and related to this topic, COVID hit it hard. COVID hit Africa very hard. And part of the reason it's such a challenge right now is the value of money and this scariness that our investors felt when the amount went from 500 to 900. We saw half of our clients say, there's no way, I can't do it. So the trend, I'll just be very candid with the panel and to the viewers out there. I know the difference between 500,000 and whatever it ends up being, 700,000, 750 maybe, but the 900,000, when it bumped up to 900, the amount of people from Africa in those countries I mentioned significantly were impacted because the value and the currency exchange and the Reserve Bank, central bank control mechanism and exchange controls really impacted the logistical aspect of making it practical. So the demand has increased, but the opportunity to meet the requirements has significantly been questioned due to these changes that occurred in 2019. And then they were, questioned with the lawsuit that we just all experienced. And we're all hoping, and all the African clients that are watching today, they're all hoping that when this is all settled, hopefully the principal amount of the EB5 regional center is lowered back down closer to where it was previously.
Okay, that's very helpful. Are there any specific issues that African investors face with respect to like source of funds?
Yeah, I like a lot of developing countries, and I'm sure that this is the case in certain parts of, India is much more developed, but around the world, developing nations, many countries, it's cash based. And in a lot of African countries, you have a lot of cash-based transactions, even though digital is coming. So occasionally on source of funds, when we run into a client and they have several businesses and they tell us up front, that they do take cash in for payment of services, my first comment is, please make sure you start developing paper trace pathways so that we can document, because your source of funds are going to be a problem if it's all cash based. So in Africa, particularly, we're recommending a lot of the clients we deal with that have the money, they're knowledgeable, but like a lot of folks, it's culturally acceptable to accept cash.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out for new investors that might be listening to this webinar that the standard of evidence that the USCIS uses to adjudicate source of funds is preponderance of the evidence, not beyond a reasonable doubt like you would have in a criminal proceeding. So that is an advantage when dealing with these complicated and more difficult source of funds scenarios where transactions might have been done in cash. Okay, well, let's move on then to the Middle East. And Priya, can you tell us a little bit about what is happening in that part of the world? You may be on mute, Priya.
I'm sorry, I keep doing that. When I first came to the Middle East about 8 years ago to first start doing EB5, there wasn't a lot of information out there. There weren't a lot of people that knew what EB5 was, or even that there was a program like this that existed through the US immigration channels. So it was sort of a brand new thing for people to be educated on. However, now, 8 years later, it's become very commonplace. So there are a lot of opportunities for EB5 investments. There's a lot of regional centers that come out here and do their own marketing. There are a lot of agents and lawyers in the region. And so EB5 in the Middle East has become pretty commonplace. And I think it's picked up and continues to pick up in terms of the numbers that we're seeing out of this region. I also wanted to speak a little bit about the issue with source of funds, sort of how we discussed it with Africa. So we don't generally have the issues of cash because everything is very well documented here. However, we do have issues with source of funds in terms of individuals from here who are normally transferring money back and forth from their home countries, as well as the fact that a lot of people here do not keep liquid cash. So everything is away in investments, especially real estate investments, which is huge here in the Middle East. And so getting that cash liquidated and getting those assets liquidated so that they can have the funds for EB5, I think the timeline of that is usually the major issue, more so than tracing the funds.
Understood. Okay. All right, let's turn to then one of the biggest markets in EB5, India. Janet, can you kick us off with a discussion on that important market for our industry?
Sure, Nikolai, thanks. Yeah, as you rightly said, and as IIUSA's latest statistics for FY19 Q1 and Q3 also clearly show that India is the largest market, was the largest market in 2019, perhaps in 2020 as well. So yes, India is rocking. To take a perspective, as Priya mentioned, in Dubai, it was similar to a similar kind of a situation in India as well when we started 6 years ago. We had to start at the base level of educating people about the EB5 product. Now it is entirely a different story. Almost everyone, every high net worth individual, ultra high net worth individual, know the basics of EB5. They may not know the intricacies, but yes, they kind of know that this kind of a product is available, is legal. So yes, it's becoming popular. We've gone through that hump of education, and then now really come to the real interest of EB5. What is slightly different here is that though at 500,000 there was a huge interest in India, which translated into applications too, as the numbers are saying as well. The 900,000, as Daniel rightly pointed out, has definitely killed a lot of interest as well. However, what we feel as we've seen the last 2-3 years, the various ups and downs, whether it's COVID, whether it's stock market, whether it's whatever, right now we are at a good wicket where in India, many people have made lots of money. And why in India? Globally, in the stock markets. The real estate markets are also booming here in India. Yes, 900,000 will still be difficult. But going back to the couple of years when they introduced 900,000, the numbers really came down. We saw a lot of interest, but at the same time, at least in India, the supply of projects in 2020 or 21 were far less than what we had in 2018-19. So all I want to add is, yes, 900 is a stiff value. If it goes back to 500, I think everyone benefits. But at the same time, whatever the price, whatever the value could be, 700, 900, as long as the supply of projects keeps coming to India and other countries, I think the interest would definitely be there. That's a different point that I just wanted to make. Some of the considerations that the investor should be careful about are the central bank regulations. The central bank is the Reserve Bank of India here, and the Foreign Exchange Management Act that's related to the foreign exchange, which every individual is supposed to not exceed. One needs to be very careful of that. These are serious issues. The limit that Indians have is only $250,000 per person in the family. But again, there are various other issues where you can't pool investments and make it a 500,000 or 900,000. So these are some considerations that the investors have to worry about pre-application and even post. Most of the investors are so enthusiastic about their applications, but perhaps they forget about the implications of all these laws when they actually get the green card and move down to the United States, and then they start worrying about the FEMA, the Foreign Exchange Management Act regulation. So the only precaution is if all this is structured, pre-structured before the application is made, I think the lives will be easier for all of us.
Yeah, very interesting. Ishan, is there anything you want to add to that? In particular, I'm thinking from the perspective of the new Indian investor who might be looking at the visa bulletin with a big smile on their face saying, India is current, this is fantastic. Is there anything there that people should know about?
I think, when you say India, I think it's important to make a distinction that, not a lot of the people who are applying with an Indian passport are in the country to begin with. There's a lot of Indians coming from Hong Kong, Singapore, the US itself. And for a lot of them, those, for example, currency issues don't necessarily apply because they're non-resident Indians. And I can tell you right now that just, being on the ground myself, I'm actually traveling to India next week. A lot of people continue to do EB5 today from India, even the direct EB5 at $500,000. As far as consideration go as waiting times, I think that the biggest advantage that the Indians based in the US have is that, even if the final action date changes and there's suddenly a priority date up on the board, the filing chart is unlikely to change. And that, I think, is a distinct advantage that the Indians in the US have. So if they're doing EB5 to escape the EB2, EB3 backlog, they actually have a shot at getting their immigration benefit sooner than, say, someone who's living outside the US.
Can you just explain what that means? Sorry for our audience that
Yeah.
may not understand that distinction in the visa bulletin.
So every month, the State Department comes out with this visa bulletin, which basically decides whether or not you're going to get a green card or going to be able to move on in the process. And so there are two charts that come out. There's your filing chart and your final action date. The filing chart, as if it's current to your date, to when you've applied, you'll be able to file your adjustment based on your approved petition and move on with the process. If your final action date is current to your date that you've made to your priority date, then you as an investor should also be able to get your green card, because your conditional green card. So it's important to understand that if you're here in the US, if you're doing adjustment, you can definitely get your immigration benefit in a certain time frame. Whereas, if you're outside the country, you may have to check that visa bulletin to make sure that you can move forward.
Yeah, excellent. That's great. Anything else you want to add generally about India?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about just the impact of $500,000 and $900,000. My personal opinion is that that Indians all over the world continue to want to move to the US, regardless of what the investment amount is. I've experienced it firsthand. I had lots of investors at $500,000 pre-November 2019. In 2020, the firm that I work for, we continue to get investors at $900,000, especially from India. At now, in the last 2-3 months, we've gotten significant number of investors at $500,000 for direct EB5. There are many investors in India who are choosing to wait for the regional center program to come back because they can afford a $900 or $1 million investment if they choose. But many who can't afford more than that know that this is do or die for them. So many of them are choosing to do the direct EB5 process. And more power to them. If they feel like this is the right decision for them and their families, I think they're doing the right thing. And I think India will continue to be a strong market, like Janak said, even with the new investment amounts, regardless of what they are.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have been surprised at the number of new Indian applicants or clients I have taken on in the direct context after explaining the differences between a regional center investment and direct. There are many people that are still very keen on moving forward. So, okay, let's switch now to Latin America. Roy and Andrew are going to cover that. Roy, why don't you get started, please, and tell us what Latin America, what countries we're talking about, first of all, and what the conditions are like for EB5 there today.
Definitely. No, thank you very much, Nikolai. And I think, Andrew and I were actually sitting in Miami a few weeks ago, and we're talking about what Latin America is. And Latin America really is many different countries with very different motivations in what they're doing. And we're normally seeing anywhere from Mexico all the way down to Chile and Argentina. And we see different trends. We've seen so far a lot of interest in the EB5 program from countries like Brazil, Venezuela, and Mexico. And we are seeing shifts, in additions in countries like Argentina, Colombia, Chile, actually increasing their interest. As a lot of the EB5 investments are motivated by several things. One is economic and political stability in their particular countries. So situations like what's going on in Argentina or Chile actually are going to motivate people to actually look to emigrate from there, where we see leftist movements potentially in Mexico also, for example, promoting and moving a lot of the investors there. But rather than, I think that putting everything on one area, I think that probably Andrew and I would like to go into some different countries and see what we're seeing and what trends we are seeing. And I'm going to start actually where we're seeing from Mexico. And I think that we've been seeing a very active Mexican investors. With looking at slightly different deals. I think it's one of the things that we find with respect to the Latin American investors is that their approach to deals is a little different than investors from other countries. They want to be more involved. They generally are high net worth or high net worth families looking to invest as a group, looking to invest in industries that they understand and be able to actually work in those matters. So it's a very interesting situation in places like Mexico, where they try to follow these deals and try to understand them better, be more involved in. Same thing with our areas. And Andrew, I mean,
Mexico, geographically, their location to the United States and most likely having family members in the U.S. helps that transition a lot easier than being from the other side of the world. You can still run a business back in Mexico and be in the U.S. under an EB-5 because of that time zone difference really is significant, if anything, most of the places.
Correct. And that's something very important, because you will have families, for example, particularly with Mexico, that actually will continue their family business there. I mean, maybe part of the family will move, or initially the wife will move. And it's an interesting Eastern structure where you're allowed to actually manage both. And I think Andrew hit something very important. The time difference and proximity, I think, are very key. In addition to that, we have other countries, like now we're seeing, for example, in Argentina and Chile. And there you look at financial and political potential instability. And the motivation now that in other places maybe, I mean, you want your kids to have a better future, have the opportunity to go to school. Now it's, we want to protect our state. We want to make sure, I mean, that our assets are protected and they're looking to relocate. So in those cases, even if there may be tax or other ramifications in their move, at the end of the day, they're looking for different motivations to actually relocate to the United States, which I think it's the key when we think a lot in America, that there are different motivations per region and per country, and understanding that, I think, is key. And Andrew, I think you work with some people, I'm actually down in Chile and Argentina too, that, I mean,
yeah. The biggest issue we're seeing, obviously, come to the U.S. right now out of Argentina. I think there's one flight per day to Miami. In prior years, we're talking about 5, 6, 7 flights per day, and that's a lot of COVID related. Outside of really the COVID issues, you think in the U.S., the way we were affected with COVID, you have to exasperate that, 10x in Latin America, and they're afraid that they're not going to be able to react to another COVID outbreak with the large population of individuals living below the poverty level. And when they're locked down where you're seeing in East Asia, you get locked down for months at a time. It's not like Miami and Texas, where you're kind of free since for over a year now. It's really something different. And the other issue that you're having from Argentina specifically is the capital export restriction. Each individual is allowed $10,000 of capital export restriction, so it makes it hard to make a $500,000 investment. Definitely.
Right now, and if you add to that, particularly as you were describing, Andrew, during COVID, the fact that, I mean, if anybody from outside Argentina actually traveled to Argentina, you were being subject to a 2 to 3 week quarantine process. So it made very difficult. And we in the firm have several Argentinian clients, and trying to visit them or actually meet with them in Argentina was virtually impossible, because it will mean getting out of commission for a month down there. I mean, now things have eased and gotten better, but that's one example. Another example, I think, it's Chile, which, I mean, is a neighboring country to Argentina, where we see significant turmoil concerns, I mean, regarding the economy and political situation, where we would expect a significant number. And we've heard a lot of interest now in the EB-5 program to potentially relocate to the United States. But that's those are, for example, 2 of the countries that we see a lot of movement. And there's always the Venezuelan community, which I think was very active for many years. We see a lot of the Venezuelan community being mostly done through people in Miami or outside of the country, like you were describing previously. Shannon was describing about India. You have, I mean, the Indians living outside of actual India. Same thing with a lot of Venezuelans. You have them from Panama. You have them even some family members here, Dominican Republic. There's a significant still presence of Venezuelans trying to also relocate. And like Andrew described earlier, not only we have the issues with some of the exchange restrictions like we had in Argentina, but also in places like Venezuela, given the records and the way it's done, exchanges, it becomes, the source of funds becomes a little more difficult. So more involvement from an accounting firm or from an additional expert to be able to explain their situation to USCIS becomes more important. And we may see this in some of the countries as some political shifts happen in Latin America.
Do you see a difference in terms of interest in regional center-based investment versus standalone? If I'm thinking of, for example, Mexico, or a country that has very close connections to the United States. Do you see more people interested in coming in and opening up their own shop versus other EB5 markets?
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's not necessarily direct to regional center. I think it's kind of what Janek was hitting on in India. There aren't as many options and people pushing in those markets that you don't see really the push as much. And the other thing I see is really with direct options, a lot of the offerings you're seeing, or at least that I've been coming across, were hospitality based. And you're asking a region that was devastated by COVID, with the industry that probably got devastated the most within that region, to go into the United States and invest within a hospitality-based investment. Not to say that they won't be successful in the U.S., but you're just kind of dipping your toe in the water because you are cautious what you've seen in the recent past.
Right.
Yeah.
That has had a significant impact, I think, in the hospitality. I mean, it's one of the great favorite, particularly for Latin Americans, as well as the food and restaurant industry. I think those concerns, even though they will see an uptick on those deals, it's concerning for them.
Okay, well, thank you for that overview. Now moving on to Asia, which I will address. As I mentioned, I've been living in Asia for 6 years, and I came back after being in Vietnam in the midst of the COVID crisis, which was sort of an unfortunate circumstance under which to leave. But of course, I've stayed in touch with my friends and my business associates in Vietnam, in China, in South Korea, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And each country is continuing to deal with their specific COVID challenges. There are various vaccination rates. The efficacy of vaccine rollouts differ from country to country. And that affects consular operations, a resumption of operations, et cetera, in different ways. But generally speaking, I think that the regional center-based EB5 investment remains strong in Asia. The China market, I think, will continue to be somewhat depressed by lengthy retrogression, but other markets where these lengthy COVID lockdowns and the resulting negative economic impacts have been pretty profound, I think EB5 investor interest is going to remain strong in the coming years. And I think that's true even at the higher investment amount, though it's going to differ from country to country. Some countries, I think most countries in Asia, will be better able to absorb a higher investment amount should that come to pass. I think with respect to Hong Kong and Taiwan, there are clear domestic drivers that underpin significant immigration interest, whether to the United States or to other countries. And that impetus is certainly only going to increase over time. So I think both Hong Kong and Taiwan remain very strong markets for EB5. And then maybe a little prediction, maybe as a result of the significant COVID lockdowns and the associated difficulties, economic, personal, and otherwise, that came with that, maybe some markets that have not historically been strong EB5 markets will emerge as stronger EB5 markets when people realize that just because they might be quite wealthy, things were not so easy under COVID, particularly if the medical system is somewhat underdeveloped. I'm thinking of the Philippines in particular. You have a history of family-based immigration. In the Philippines, you see lengthy retrogression in most of the family-based categories, but a real underutilization generally of many employment-based categories, and specifically EB5. I spent a lot of time in the Philippines trying to develop a market, and it's very much like other developing markets in that individuals just hadn't really heard of EB5, and if they had, they kind of thought it was a scam. I think very much like the early days in Vietnam and in India. And if the industry takes notice that there is interest and they all go to Manila and start to talk to people about a project and about EB5, perhaps that can be an exciting market in the future. So let's finish up now on the country-specific considerations and quickly just touch on Europe and particularly the UK. Daniel, I know you were going to say a few things about that.
Thanks, Nikolai. Yeah, it's interesting. Thank you for your perspective on the Philippines, and I would agree on Manila in particular. With regard to Europe and UK specifically, what we found, there's a trend because of Brexit. There's tremendous amount of business confusion, logistical confusion between the EU and UK businesses. That you've probably read about challenges with fuel being distributed to filling stations and EU drivers not available to come to the UK. So what we've seen, we've actually we have an office in London through our affiliate, and there's a fair amount of business people that are interested in avoiding the hassles that they're currently going through with this, trying to figure out the Brexit situation. So by doing an EB5, they could actually become a dual citizen, expand their business to the US, kind of get away from figuring out the challenges that Brexit is causing them. So we're seeing a fair amount of people from the UK, specifically London area, that are very interested in the opportunity. There's also a demand, I think, some of the smaller Eastern European countries that, Turkey, larger, but Turkey is an area of political turmoil. And so we've got some folks in Turkey that are showing interest. The challenge in some of these countries, like we've all experienced, is when you have a country going through some political turmoil, they're making it extremely difficult to get money out of the country. So that is a challenge that we see in certain countries, not necessarily, Europe, but all over the world, where the countries don't necessarily want the wealthy people to be investing and leaving to a different country. They want them to stay and keep their money in the country. So that's kind of an overview of Europe for us.
Okay, terrific. Well, I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. So let's dive right into the second portion of our panel, the EB5 process. As we've heard from around the world, there are challenges to EB5, but it still remains an excellent opportunity for many people that want to emigrate to the United States and get a permanent green card and potentially, eventually, US citizenship. So from the perspective of that new person, somebody who may be listening to this panel and says to themselves, hey, EB5, I'm interested in it, but I don't really know anything about it. What do they do? What is sort of the first step? What is a resource that people might be able to go to get accurate information about EB5, not fake news, but accurate information? And Priya, maybe you can tell us what some of those resources might be and give new investors some suggestions about what to do.
Sure. I think there's definitely a lot more information out there these days. Everything's become a lot more transparent in terms of EB5. So there are a lot of places where you can get good information. For example, IIUSA has a good blog where you can get information, current up-to-date information on what's going on in the industry, what industry leaders are pushing for, even a lot of good information about what's going on currently with the reauthorization. Somewhere where I always direct our clients to is just directly to the government websites like USCIS. They usually will update and make announcements on USCIS. So for example, when a lot of clients had questions about whether this $500,000 decrease was actually a real thing, if the government was actually going to accept applications at 500,000, I just directed them to the USCIS website, where USCIS had actually made an announcement that they were accepting applications at 500,000. I think that seeing it directly from a government website also gives a lot of investors comfort, as it should, because it's sort of coming straight from the horse's mouth. One thing that I would kind of caution against, which I've seen a lot of my investors and investors in this region specifically participate in, is they often end up participating in investor forums or investor groups. For example, there are several groups on Telegram, for example, on Botim and other investor forums online. The reason why I would caution against that is because oftentimes the information that's getting passed around on those forums is directly from investors themselves who may not actually have accurate information. And what ends up happening is that rumors start spreading and people start getting scared, and it's more of a fear that gets placed in people when they are on these large forums with various other investors who might be having issues in their own process, or who might be worried about things that are going on in EB5. For example, the reauthorization. So I'd always encourage investors to sort of stay away from those types of forums and go directly to the sources that are more reliable and verified, like IIUSA, USCIS. Some of the bigger law firms that are well known have great blogs and newsletters as well. I myself subscribe to a lot of the law firms' newsletters, and I get great information from there that's up to date on what's going on in the EB5 industry.
I think that's great advice. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and I couldn't agree more with you about some of the investor-led groups. I mean, it's a bit like anything. If you have a medical condition, suddenly you have a bunch of so-called doctors running around giving advice. EB5 is complicated, so you really want to consult the experts and people who are well respected in the industry. Okay, so the next step in the process is really, I think, beginning to understand what is available, what is a project, what is an offering. And Janak, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the difference, first of all, between direct EB5 and regional center EB5. Many investors, of course, have this question now because direct is the only option for an EB5 investment at the moment. So they're probably thinking about what that is, but may not fully understand the differences and perhaps drawbacks or perhaps advantages of a direct investment.
Right. So before we dive into what is a direct EB5 and what is an indirect EB5, let me first address what is EB5. So EB5, EB stands for employment base. If I were an investor, I would look for this kind of information, that EB5 is a particular number, 5 is a particular number given by the USCIS. It's a program where an investor can invest money. By virtue of that money which is being invested, it creates a certain number of jobs in the United States for American citizens. And by virtue of that, the investor who's investing the money at risk gets an EB5 visa, which translates into a green card. And after a number of years, it can translate into a citizenship if you so desire. So that's the broad EB5 perspective. It is the fastest way of going to the United States and settling there permanently. So now there are two different types of EB5. Employment generation of 10 Americans is the most critical part. of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The money that you would invest in a project, 10 Americans is the most critical part of your investment. The mon Project could be a JW Marriott in Orlando. It could be a steel project. It could be a multi-family construction. Broadly, the projects are related to construction, which creates employment. Now, the moment the employment is created, this employment is actually created by the project which you are investing in it. That is an indirect investment that you would be making as an investor, which creates jobs, and that will get you an EB-5 visa. The other way of looking at it, and the other 95% or more than 90% of the people who invest broadly in the indirect EB-5 methodology, right? The direct EB-5 is that you can also go to the United States, create a company, invest this capital, the same capital, and create jobs, 10 American jobs at 500,000, right? Only 2, 3, or 5% of the people do this because there are, in my personal opinion is that is far more riskier than an indirect EB-5, but I would not want to get into those pros and cons right now. So these are the two methods. You create your own company, you create employment for 10 Americans, and by virtue of which you get an EB-5, or you invest in real estate projects. There are developers in America who've been there for hundreds of years, and they've built some fantastic projects, and that creates employment by virtue of which you get an indirect EB-5. These are the two broad differences that I'd like to talk about. And just one more point that I'd like to say from the investor's perspective is that if I were an investor, who should I be dealing with, right, in the entire world of EB-5? Mind you, as far as Indians are concerned, the process could start now and could go up to maybe 6, 7 years as well till you get your money back. You could put your feet into the United States maybe as soon as 3 years, give or take 1 or 2 years here or there. But who are the important people? Who are the participants that I should be dealing with as an investor? One is a regional center. Regional center is like an investment banker, to put it simply, who will find these projects, who would find developers who need the money, and EB-5 is one source of finance, which the regional center stroke investment banker would raise for the developer. That money, all those monies would be raised from all over the world, and the EB-5, prospective EB-5 investors would be investing in those projects. So you would need a regional center. They will bring in a developer. You can do your own due diligence of the regional center and the developer. The information is available on websites all over. You would need an agent here in India if you need more help in terms of structuring your entire pre and post applications. My only request to investors is please deal with only those entities who are registered with the local regulator, be it the central bank, be it the SEC, be it the FINRA, or be it SEBI in India, which is a local regulator. As long as you're dealing with regulated entities, one should not have a problem in the entire process.
Excellent. That is very good advice. So you mentioned due diligence. And Andrew, can you tell us a little bit about what kind of documentation is available once an investor is interested in a specific project in terms of conducting due diligence? Of course, an investor could drive out and visit a project site. That sometimes happens. But if they're given access to a share file and they see all of these documents, can you tell us a little bit about what they are and why they're important and what investors should be looking for?
Sure. Thanks, Nikolai. So, the first thing I'd like to say is when you're reviewing a project and they give you a set of documentation, never be afraid to ask for more documentation. There is always supplemental information to really back up the statements that are being made in these different offering documents. So some of the offering documents you can come by are first and foremost related to PPM, which is the private placement memorandum. It's kind of like a marketing document. It essentially covers everything that you need to know, a lot of disclosures, tell you what you should be looking out for, your exit plan, your entry point, a background of the developers or, project sponsors, whatever it may be, regional center history a little bit. But one thing that we've come across doing due diligence is it's just like you were talking about going to a doctor prior. When you go to a doctor's office, do you really know all the questions you should be asking when you get to the point of some kind of extensive diagnosis? And no, in reality, you don't. You're continuously learning. So you're kind of basing off of them what questions you should be asking. And I always ask the doctor, when they say, is there anything else I should ask? Is there anything else I should be looking for? And I always ask them, like, what else? What else could I ask? Am I missing a question to be asked? So I think it's important when you go with someone that's kind of registered and experienced in the industry, because they know the questions to ask those regional centers on your behalf that you would never even think of, because sometimes there's scenarios that you wouldn't know about unless you were involved for that time period. Some of the other documents, the business plan, which you'll see very similar to other types of business plans, just structured specifically for EB5 and kind of USCIS offerings, talking about the project, the industry, the location, and the sponsors, again, with some of their histories. And I think one of the more important documents for the end of the road is the economic report. When we're talking about regional center projects, we're looking at projects that, by law should cover 10 jobs per investor. Any project you go to that's experienced is going to have a buffer for that, whether it be 3 or 10 or whatever it may be at the time. And the reason you really want those buffers is because when you get to the end of the road there and you're applying to remove your conditions from your conditional residency, sometimes USCIS may come back and say, we don't accept jobs 1 and 2. And thank God that person that you invested with and you can trust it, had 3 buffer spots just to really protect you as the investor when you come down to that point. So like I said, really ask this question, many questions as you can. You can always ask for more documents. Never be afraid to ask for documents. And if you don't speak the language, and trust in someone that does speak the language for you, and take the time to read it. There are specific scenarios that not even really we can envision, but we would be the best to potentially envision what could come up.
Great. One of the things that regional centers may tell a potential investor is that we have a 924 approval, and that's a term that you use and hear a lot in the industry. Daniel, can you tell us what that is and what, if any, protections that affords a potential investor?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Andrew, I think, hit it on the head too. And for the viewers out there, part of the challenge in understanding EB5 is there's so many terminology, acronyms, numbers, phrases, and to answer your question, so the I924, you're going to hear that, and it's actually a little more complicated than just one quick question because it's broken up into 2 subcomponents. So without getting too much into the weeds, an I-924 for a regional center is what we did as a regional center to get approval to become a regional center. That was a very lengthy process. There's a deep dive into the principles, background history, background checks. But for you viewers out there, that the fact that we did that and we spent all the time, effort, and energy to do it should give you some confidence that we are reputable and we know what we're doing. Related to this panel, the second really more relevant I-924 is a project I-924, I-924, which is also called an exemplar. And some folks use it. They will take the time in advance of constructing a new development project. They will take the time to submit to USCIS kind of a pre-approval of that project. So when they do start the development project, it's actually got the approval or essentially the blessing of USCIS that it's a good project, and it's got what's called an exemplar, another jargon word. You're going to hear that. Some regional centers really tout it like our project's got an exemplar. But here's the thing, folks. When a project is submitted for approval for an exemplar, it can take up to 2 years to get that project approved for an exemplar. And during those 2 years of time, the market conditions change. And things change from an investment process and market conditions and evaluation and job creation. So we have pursued exemplar and we've not pursued. And what we've found is for most of our projects, and we've done 35 projects now, in our opinion, it's not necessary for our projects because we have learned through 10 years how to do this properly and create well in excess of 10 jobs, closer to like 19 on average over 35 projects. So we don't do it, but some folks do it. So again, it's another word that you're going to hear. It's called an exemplar. Some folks are going to really tout it. The question is, will it be really relevant come time for development and come time for the job creation approval process?
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's a data point in an individual's analysis, but it is not necessarily evidence that it's even a good investment. It's not an investment document. The PPM is the investment document. The 924 is an immigration document. So it's the USCIS saying, at this point in time, based on the papers that you have submitted to us, this project complies with immigration rules.
Right.
And those things can change. And as you say, the longer that a 924 has been approved for, the more changes may occur in the project, including potentially material changes. So it's important, and it's a big feature of the process from the regional center side, but it's not the be all and end all.
Right.
Okay, so another term that you are likely going to hear and may or may not be important to you depending on where in the world you are from. So if you are Chinese or Indian, the concept of redeployment is likely going to be more important to you. But in fact, for every investor, they need to understand, even if they come from a country that doesn't have retrogression, what redeployment is, because it may also affect their rights and obligations and ability to be repaid, depending on how the offering is structured. So, Ishan, can you please tell us a little bit about redeployment and generally repayment of an individual's EB-5 investment?
Sure. So to wrap up the whole, project and project due diligence aspect, understanding the repayment process of the offering that you're looking at is pretty important. You want to understand how the money you've invested is going to come back to you. The advantage that a regional center investment has is that a lot of them can be structured as loans. So you know the exact loan maturity date, you know the coupon rate, and you know when the money is going to come back to you. In a direct project, if since you're going to be an equity investor, you want to study that exit plan pretty carefully. Whether it's sale, refinance, or a cash flow sweep, I think it's important to understand how your investment is structured when you're making that assessment. I think it's important to note that, say, for example, like the current direct projects that we're doing, we're pooling direct investors into a project at the $500,000 level and allowing them to basically invest in direct EB-5 projects. At the end of the day, when you're looking at redeployment, if you're a regional center investor, this does matter to you. I know the stuff with redeployment and direct is different, but with the regional center investor, you want to be aware that if the project repays before your conditional green card period is over, your funds will then need to be reinvested or redeployed. So it's really important for you as an investor to study your PPM very carefully. In direct EB-5, the PPMs tend to be smaller. It's more or less the subscription agreement, a few other things. But when you're looking at a regional center EB-5, you want to make sure that when it talks about redeployment, the issuer is taking your consent before your money is reinvested. Now, that is really important because, when you take a look at some of the scams and frauds that have taken place in EB-5, a lot of it has happened is because issuers, without telling or even informing their investors, have reinvested their money, their capital into different projects, oftentimes projects that investors have not even done their due diligence on. So it's really important for investors to study those documents and understand those redeployment and repayment structures and how what's going to happen at that point of time. Because a lot of times when you make the investment, you're not going to be able to see the repayment and the redeployment horizon way into the future. So it's important you anticipate and go through that. And I think, working with a good attorney to understand that portion is important. Especially considering redeployment is a lot of it is immigration related. A good immigration attorney, especially someone who's like board certified, should be able to have walk you through that language and help you understand that. So definitely use those resources as if possible. I'm an EB5 investor myself. I highly recommend everybody else do the same amount of due diligence that I did when making my investment.
Well, that's a perfect segue into what I think is the most important issue in the EB5 process, finding a good EB5 attorney. Roy, what can someone do to find an attorney that's competent in EB5 and with which they are comfortable being the lead for them through the EB5 process?
Definitely. And I think that, like you mentioned, being able to actually find an attorney that, has the appropriate experience is key for any of these projects. I believe that there are many areas of the laws the same way there are many areas of medicine. I think to talk like Andrew was mentioned before, for example, if I have an issue with my heart, I don't necessarily go to a neurosurgeon, no matter how good they are. So I think that key here is being able to find an attorney who has experience with EB5 and the type of projects that we're looking for. And thankfully, entities like IIUSA and other matters have actually this information where investors can go and research. And there are different aspects and different things that they would be needing to do. So one, an investor should look at an attorney that has the right track record, have the right experience in working with the projects, working with investors, analyzing these projects and seeing these matters. And as well, at the end of the day, somebody they feel comfortable with. I think that at the end of the day, that's super important that they feel that level of comfort, not only on their expertise, but that there's that connection with those attorneys. I think that using resources such as IIUSA and other groups to research the attorney, I think it's important. Depending on what they're doing, I think like Ishan was mentioning, the immigration experience, I believe, is key. I think they need to understand, have the track record and the experience analyzing these projects from an immigration perspective, but also if they're actually analyzing things like PPM documents and other securities documents, but they also will have a background in either corporate law or securities laws to be able to analyze and give them a full analysis. I believe that, like we've had mentioned here, it's important for investors to ensure that they do their due diligence. They actually analyze their projects, their project documents, that they understand it well, and that they ask questions. And generally, the best source for those questions should be the attorney. Also, looking for an attorney that has no conflicts in the project, that can provide them a sort of a fresh idea to them. It's also important. But at the end of the day, it comes to two things: experience and comfort for the investor. They have to find somebody that they feel comfortable with, that has the experience in immigration and securities matters to analyze the project with. But it is a key aspect of any investor. You're talking about lifelong investment for a person. Relocation, tax ramifications, all these matters that, if are not analyzed well on a pre-immigration basis, can have very negative repercussions on an individual. And I think that choosing your attorney and making sure that they have the right expertise, I think it's key in ensuring that you avoid as much as possible any problems down the road.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. And it's important for people to understand that this attorney-client relationship is going to last for quite some time. EB5 is a lengthy process. By the time you're filing an I-829 petition, sometimes it's 4 or 5 years out. And by the time an 829 is actually approved, it's even longer, 7, 8 years perhaps. So it's a long-term relationship. So you definitely want to know that you connect with somebody, that you understand and that you like, and that can get you through all facets of the EB5 process.
Nicola, I think it's worth also mentioning the conflict of interest bit. You want to make sure you're not hiring an attorney that's also representing your issuer as well as you yourself.
Yeah, that is something to definitely look at. There are regional centers that do that. That is permitted, though the conflict has to be waived. So if somebody wants to do that, they would have to read the conflict language and understand how a conflict between a project attorney and an attorney representing individual investors could arise. But yeah, that's a good point. Janak, one of the biggest roles that an immigration attorney plays in the EB-5 process is strategizing about the source of funds. Of course, this is a key component of the EB-5 process. The US government does not want to grant an immigration benefit to somebody who has earned their funds unlawfully. Can you briefly, Janak, describe for us what that involves?
Sure, but before that, if you permit, may I just give a different perspective on risk related to projects?
Sure.
Okay. So as everyone rightly said, attorney is the other key person in the entire world of EB-5. And while there are documents and presentations on projects, I would, as an investor, rely on the attorney highly to go through them and at least get some kind of a security for the jobs which are going to be created. As far as the finance side is concerned, what I would rather do after going through the documents and the lovely presentations, I would ideally visit the spot, go to the project, check out what is happening there, what are the plans, meet the people, do a kind of a smell test, go through the numbers, go through the equity stack, what is the skin in the game of the promoter, and then evaluate whether to go ahead with the project or not. So since EB-5 is standing on two legs, one is the immigration, where the attorney is the most important person that you want to have. And as everyone rightly said, the highly experienced ones would definitely help. And as far as the financial side is concerned, I would urge the investors to do it themselves. It's a decent amount for everyone, so it would be worthwhile. Coming to the SOF, there's a source of funds, which is the most important part here, because USCIS accepts only those source of funds which are clean. In India, it's called black money, which is not clean, which is not tax paid. So that's a huge no-no for the EB-5 application. By and large, we haven't had much issues here in India, Nikolai, because most of the monies have come from either mutual funds or equity direct, secondary market sale, where the contracts are available of the purchases which are made. Most of our investors have been able to get the mother of documents as to where the money came from when they invested and when they sold, and the sales proceeds, which would then go for the EB-5 application. Real estate is a little bit of an issue here in India, where some of the documents may or may not be available of old properties, but there are courts which help you streamline that. So source of funds is really, really important. If the source isn't clean, your application is not going to go through. So it's very essential that you have a highly experienced attorney. We also help out by the term here is chartered accountant. It's like one of the big four accountant firms, which also ratify source of funds along with the attorney if needed.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it's worth making a distinction, actually. We do this internally. There are really two components to the source of funds. There's the source, how you actually earned the money. And that can be often from earned income, a house sale, a business sale, business income, or even a mortgage. You can take a mortgage out on your house. And then there's the path of funds. And that, in fact, is where we see many RFEs. That's tracing the movement of the money from that source until it's finally invested in the escrow account. If you sell a house for the purpose of investing in EB-5, then that's pretty easy. The path of funds is a couple of bank statements. But if you inherited property 20 years ago and you invested that money in mutual funds and stock markets, and maybe you lent some money to a brother who repaid you, and then you invested that money in another business venture, well, the sources are pretty straightforward, but the path can be fairly convoluted. And we often end up drawing, these flowchart diagrams that are 2 pages long to try to follow the money. So, but that again is why it's advisable to partner with an experienced immigration attorney who knows what the standard is. And just again, the standard is preponderance of the evidence, which really helps us in situations like that, where it just has to be more likely than not that we are telling the truth. Okay, so I just want to shout out here to the audience. I saw a couple of questions pop up and then they disappeared. There are currently no questions, so we're going to keep talking. But I encourage anyone with any questions to please ask them, and I will try to weave them in to the remaining part of this panel. Let's move now to what's involved, Andrew. If you could tell us briefly, when a person is ready to pull the trigger, they want to invest. What does that look like? What are the steps involved?
Sure. So, when we get before pulling the trigger, we really would like for you to talk with whoever you're working with, whether it be the division center directly or an immigration attorney kind of helping you out, or someone like myself, like a registered agent, and we want to make sure that your case is going to be approvable. And Janek was talking about source of funds, and some other words we're talking about project specific, but really let's make sure the source of funds is going to be approvable. Let's make sure that your background is going to be clean. Let's make sure that you're going to be accepted by the project, that you're a credit investor, if that's the case, that's necessary, or that you're doing all the paperwork outside the US. So I think that's the first step. Let's make sure your case is approvable. The second step would really be, let's help find the projects that you're looking for. Review all your documents, you do all these things. Once you find kind of the project you're looking for, then I think you retain an immigration attorney and start doing your source of funds while you're still kind of narrowed down the project base to 2 or 3 projects. Once you get to that point, then you're going to be looking at doing your subscription agreement, which you can start filling out, and you won't get kind of a counter signature with most projects until you're sending in your investment capital as well as your administration fee. You'll then, after signing all the offering documents with subscription, your operating agreements, your escrow agreement, and so on, you'll end up getting that receipt from the US, from your project. And that's kind of the last document that will be needed outside of the source of funds for the immigration attorney to send in your full set of documents along with the template. So you'll have a subscription agreement, an operating agreement, an escrow agreement. You'll have your source of funds completed, and you'll have kind of a receipt from the project stating that they've received your investment and that's being held in escrow. Generally, most projects hold your investment capital in escrow until you get that 797 receipt, which is a receipt from the US government essentially saying, hey, we've received your application and now here's your priority number and you're pending now. You're starting to get reviewed. So that's kind of the process that goes through it. And from then on, you're in a little bit of a waiting game.
That's excellent. Okay, so that's a lot of things involved in the process. I think a lot of investors who may be listening to this are wondering, well, the program, the regional center program still needs reauthorization. Should I bother doing any of this stuff now, or should I just wait until it's reauthorized? Andrew, what are your thoughts on that? Is there anything that people can start doing now? Should they be looking at potential EB-5 opportunities if they really are interested in going forward when the program is reauthorized?
Sure. I mean, the first thing you take into account is most likely we're seeing the price increasing, right? So is that an investment amount that you can partake in? Otherwise, you're kind of going to be wasting your time, and maybe you should look for other opportunities to move to the US, maybe through a different type of visa for the time being, or another country that really is specific to your desires. And then if you can take on that increased investment amount, let's say in the high end, it's 900, right? We're all expecting it to be around 750 to be clear. But let's say just for safety's sake, let's say it's 900 and you're ready to move forward. Yeah, you should begin to start reviewing some projects in some areas you'd like to be in. Understanding the program probably first. How does it work? What is my timeline going to be like? What's the process to get to the US? And then maybe I'll start looking at projects, and if you start dreaming a little bit, we start thinking about where am I going to end up moving to the US and getting my kids in school and so forth. But yes, you can start reviewing some projects, and most importantly, is my money going to be accepted by the US government as an approval, the trail of it? And then, how does this program work and what's my immigration process going to be? Then I think we can start looking to projects. And the reason I'm starting leaving projects last is because we don't know what the changes in the offering documents are going to state based off whatever happens in Congress. So you could spend, hours reading these 600, 700 pages of documents and then just having to go back and start from scratch. And it could be a little bit of a waste of time. You can say, I like the project, I like the benefit, the foundation, things like that, and look at that for a high level. But when you start going into like the nitty gritty of it, I think you wait a little bit and then just understand the program more so than the project specifically.
Okay. Daniel, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I had a couple of notes. I agree that for some folks, if it does go to 900, it's, the question is it a waste of time or not? Our perspective is, if you're interested in this program in general, it's worth some time right now, even though hopefully December 3rd, we get some indication. But, you can do some research right now. You could start researching law firms. I think everybody on this panel has said one of the most critical aspects of going through this process is finding the right attorney. So if I was an investor, I would be on the phone, I would be sending emails, I would be interviewing immigration attorneys right now. Spend a week or two, do that. Once you find one that you like, you feel comfortable with, and we can all help you with that. There's folks on this panel that can help you, but there are excellent attorneys. And once you define who you want, then they can help you start processing your source of funds. So there's a lot of work you can do right now while we're all kind of in this limbo stage. And at the same time, you can also look at projects. We've got a project, we can send you a business plan. You can review it right now and say, do you like this particular project? Is it your cup of tea? So I wouldn't, if I was an investor and if I wanted to make some progress rather than sitting, I would take action and do these three things.
Excellent. So again, I'm not seeing any questions coming up, but if anyone does have a question, please let me know or raise your hand. Let's move quickly then to the immigration process. And Roy, maybe you can tell us a little bit about all the form numbers. And for a new investor, these can be pretty overwhelming, all of these numbers that are thrown at them. But just briefly tell us what they are and where they fit in to the EB-5 immigration process, please.
Definitely, no, and like you mentioned, I mean, there's Daniel mentioned before, you're gonna hear a lot of acronyms and forms and things, and I think the filing forms for an investor are key. And like we mentioned before, this is a very long process. It's going to be a process that you're going to have a relationship with your immigration attorney for a long time. But everything starts with actually the filing of a form I-526, which is the immigrant petition by alien entrepreneur. That's the petition where you actually, as an investor, file with USCIS related to a regional center project or a project where you actually show your source of funds and provide information regarding the project itself. That initial filing, it's what starts running the clock for your application. And it needs to show also that your investment has been made in the project, as well as other general information. And we will not go into a lot of detail because we have a limited time, but that's really the initial and most important form that you will file will be the 526. Some of that information will be provided by you related to the source of funds in particular, and the information regarding the project will be provided by the regional center or the project developer. All that information will be compiled and present and actually presented by your attorney and submitted to USCIS. So once actually that is submitted, and there's generally a waiting period that may be 16 months or more, generally you will receive a response on your 526. And that, assuming that form I-526 gets approved, you will have to actually request your green card. And that process will vary depending on where you are located. If you are within the United States, you will file a form I-485 or an adjustment of status form. If you are outside in the United States, you do a Form D6 DS-260 at National Visa Center, and the process starts where you actually request your green card. Generally, what happens is and with COVID, timings have changed, but this can be anywhere from 6 to 8 months to await approval on an adjustment of status, or it can be, 6 to 12 months for an interview. Again, with COVID, all these times have changed, and it depends on where you are located and where you will get the interview if you're outside of the United States. But once you do that, and again, assuming everything goes well, you receive a conditional permanent resident status approval, which is a 2-year permanent resident card or green card. Once that 2-year period passes, then you need to file Form I-829. And file a Form I-829, it's the petition to remove the conditional residence. So when you receive your initial green card, it's a full green card, but it's conditioned to fulfilling certain objectives that the project created, the jobs, etc. So in that Form 829, your immigration attorney, who generally will be the same individual attorney who helped you with your 526, that person will help put together, again, some documents from your information, personal information, as well as information from the project, showing now that what was intended to happen, like project job creation, etc., did happen. That gets submitted to USCIS, and generally, in a period, 18 to 24 months, there's a permanent green card. You receive your permanent green card. All these time periods have changed, but the forms remain generally the same. And that's why it's so important, like we were discussing before, to work very closely with your immigration attorney to ensure, that the right documents are submitted, as well as all the timings are managed properly.
Yeah, that's great. And Ishan, can you tell us a little bit about the adjudication timeframes, to the extent to which they may have been affected by COVID, what our expectations are? It's a really difficult question to answer because there are some unknowns, but what is the USCIS website indicating these days, et cetera? Ishan, what are you seeing there?
Sure. So I'm going to give a disclaimer early on and say that, I have very strong opinions when it comes to USCIS and processing times. That is something actually I've been wanting to change for a long time. In fact, if you look up my name versus USCIS, you're going to find a court case against them that I filed because of slow processing of my petition. But the short version of that is that I won the lawsuit. I got my 829 approved within a year, much faster than the official waiting time, which is, I think, like 3 or 4, 5 years, something like that on the USCIS side. So let's start with that. So I realized that the USCIS processing side is going to say that the processing times for I-526 and other petitions is long. I also want to address right off the bat that regardless of whether it's in a normal world, regional center and direct petitions both get approved along the same timeline. It's not that direct petitions get approved faster than that. Right now, there's an exception because adjudicators are not processing regional center petitions. But if you're investing in a direct project right now, just keep in mind that there's no additional benefit to you other than having, say, an earlier priority date than other investors who are coming at the regional center application whenever that's reauthorized. Keeping that in mind, also investors should be aware that each consulate will have different processing times too. When I did my visa interview at the New Delhi consulate back when they were doing it, it took nearly 8 months for them to schedule an interview with me and move forward my process. Whereas, I remember my attorney at that time telling me that, hey, I've got this other client in Turkey who we scheduled an appointment and he got it within 2 months. And on the other hand, I had to wait nearly 8 months. So every consulate you deal with, every outpost that you deal with is going to be different. So I think investors should be aware of that. And, when talking about these timelines, I realized that, if you're investing today, you're planning for, 2 to 3, possibly 4 years to get your, conditional green card or entry into the country. And like I mentioned early on in this panel about the advantage you have if you're doing adjustment, because, that way if you're on a non-immigrant visa and you're adjusting over to an immigrant visa, then you'll get your EAD and advanced parole in time. So what can you as an investor do to prepare for this? I think, earlier panelists talked about what you can do right now. But I think just, getting your source of funds and everything ready ahead of time will benefit you. That way, when for example, if you're planning to do the regional center project, it's good to have that 800, 900K sourced and ready to go. That way you're able to make that investment as soon as the program is authorized, grab your priority date, lock that in, and wait for your petition to be approved. And similarly, if you're looking to do the direct pool EB5, sourcing that $500,000, having that ready to go, locking in your project as soon as you see one that you like is not a bad idea too. So in fact, I have a lot of investors who are keeping both direct and regional center options open for themselves, and they'll take a call whenever they feel it's necessary. And finally, to wrap it up, with regards to as every investor asks themselves, when should I expect this? When should I expect something to come in? I think it's important to work with your attorney and actually check in with them on a regular basis just to see how things are. If your petition has been delayed, I know I, as an investor, do try to provide as many resources as I can to my existing investors, whether it's helping them file expedite requests if they have a valid reason, or pursuing them and pursuing USCIS in court. I think investors should use every tool at their disposal to ensure that they can get their application approved in time. But again, working with a skilled, knowledgeable, experienced immigration attorney on these matters is important. Other than that, I guess all I can say is that it's a waiting game.
It is a waiting game, and I would just echo what you said about suing the government, filing a so-called mandamus action. And that can be done at any point in time, really, where the petition has been waiting an unreasonable period of time. And unreasonable is not defined by what the USCIS says EB5 adjudication is. For example, the I-526 petition right now has an adjudication time frame of between 57 and 80 weeks. I mean, that's just ridiculous. We have successfully filed mandamus actions to compel USCIS action on petitions pending for periods of time much less than that. Okay, in the immigration process then, just to finish up here on that, sometimes you get these things called requests for evidence, RFEs. Sometimes they're NOIDs and notice of intent to deny. What are those? How does that work? Who responds? Daniel, can you give us and potential investors a little clarity on that, please?
Sure. Once again, here we go with the acronyms. I wanted to compliment Ishan and you, Nick. I think what this really states, viewers out there, please understand how critical it is to hire the best immigration attorney you possibly can, because this is some complicated information. And if the folks know what they're doing, they will help you streamline the process. If they don't, they can bog you down and cause you a lot of delays. So I wanted to compliment that. I think this panel has done a really good job of helping the viewers understand the immigration attorney that you hire. Don't just go out and hire some attorney that's a relative or a friend of yours that thinks they can do it. Make sure that person has done EB5 successfully, because it's complicated. It's not an easy process. So I just wanted to kind of hit on that. So folks, with regard to an RFE, as you apply, you're going to make an application. And then in many cases, as the investor, this is why the immigration attorney is so important. You're going to provide a source of funds. As the submittal package goes to USCIS, they're going to review it, and they might look at it and say, you know what, this just doesn't make sense. They will send back a notice, what's called an RFE, which is a request for additional evidence. So maybe your bank statements only went back 1 year and they want to see 3 years. It could be a variety of things. They want to see a title transfer of a real estate transaction. There's a variety of areas that they will come back to you as an investor. So the question is, who responds? And the answer goes back to, in this case, as an investor, most likely it's going to be the highly qualified attorney that you're working with. And in our case, we have pretty good relationships with 3 or 4 attorneys. And if they need help, we'll help them out as well. So it's kind of a team effort, because it's important to provide the information, get the evidence back as soon as possible so they can cross it off their checklist and it moves on. Now, the second question about the NOID, that's another acronym called Notice of Intent to Deny. That's kind of a serious one. Not kind of, it is a serious one. And as Nick stated earlier, he is an immigration attorney and works with NOIDs. These are serious matters that need immediate attention. I don't know, Nick, are we still under the 33-day response limitation?
We actually get an extra 60 days now because of COVID.
Okay, yeah, because I just, so anyhow, for the viewers out there, these are serious matters. Something's gone wrong. They're questioning maybe you're stating that your application has a party to the application that you're claiming as a relative, and they're questioning if it's a real relative or not. It's an important area that they're considering denying you. You need to get on it quickly, and you need to work with your immigration attorney right away. So these are serious matters.
Yep. Priya, is there anything you want to add to that, just in terms of maybe source of funds responses, or anything in connection with response to RFEs or NOIDs?
Sorry, I did it again, but I didn't unmute myself. But with regards to RFEs and NOIDs, so what we've been seeing personally here more than before is we've actually been seeing USCIS issue straight NOIDs rather than an RFE and then a NOID. We've seen that become more commonplace over the past couple of years. Which generally means there's, one opportunity to respond rather than first having the RFE opportunity and then they may issue a NOID. That's only happened in one of our cases. It's not something to be worried about. I feel like this is something that really gives investors anxiety. But what they should know is that it's very, very commonplace to get an RFE or a NOID. And so long as it's responded to in a timely manner like we've mentioned in this panel, by an experienced attorney who you've chosen to represent you through the immigration process, it shouldn't be an issue. But yes, I think it's important for investors to know that is pretty commonplace. It can cause a slight delay in your processing time, but it's also not something to be too worried about.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. Often when an RFE comes in, if you haven't had the conversation, or as you point out these days, it could be more likely a NOID, which is quite annoying that USCIS has chosen to start doing that. But I generally have a conversation with the client before we start about that possibility, but sometimes they forget about that conversation, and it's all about what did you do wrong in my petition? And it's not necessarily the case that the attorney or the regional center, for that matter, did anything wrong. It really is a matter, of course, for the USCIS, sometimes just kicking the tires, if you will, sometimes looking for something more serious. Well, with that, we are out of time. We could continue to talk about these issues for quite some time still, but we have to wrap it up there after an hour and a half of great discussion. I'm so delighted and honored to have participated on this panel and moderated this panel with all of these great EB-5 experts. All of our bios are available at the IIUSA website, so if you have any follow-up questions or weren't able to answer any questions during the panel, please reach out to any of us and we will be happy to do so. With that, enjoy the rest of your day or evening or afternoon, wherever you may be. And please enjoy the rest of the IIUSA event. I wish we were doing this live in Orlando, but this is definitely a second best. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikolai. And
Thank you.
Thank you to all of our panelists, in particular, Priya and Janak, who are up pretty late in their market. So thank you to you guys and for everyone overseas who was able to join today. We have a couple-hour break here, but our next panel will be beginning at noon. That's a really important panel. That's our EB-5 Legislative Updates panel. So I encourage everyone to join that discussion. If you've missed any of the programming from the first couple of days of our event, if you log on to the online event page, you'll find a link to those panel recordings there for your access. Thank you again for everyone who participated today. As Nikolai said, we hope to be in person in Orlando. That didn't work out, but we are putting together our 2022 international event plans as we speak. So we look forward to continuing these discussions in some of these important investor markets around the world. Thank you again. We'll see you on the next panel.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.